Okay, so we're going to resume with our authentication lesson. So we can register a user now. We can hash the password. We've added some validation in our form so that the user has to give us a strong password. We probably should check before we insert a new user. We should make sure we don't already have a user with this username. So we'll want to connect to the database, but we're going to need to run a quick query first and evaluate the result before we go ahead and insert somebody. So this will be our duplicate check before insert. So do we already have a user in the database with this username? So we'll execute this query. And we'll use the fetch command. And then we can evaluate, did we get a user back or did we get a null back? If we got a null back, it's a new user, we can go ahead and save. If we got a matching record back, we already have this person, we already have this email, so we want to show an error message. We'll try to use the empty function here. I'm not entirely sure if it's going to work, or we're going to have to tweak this a little bit. We'll see. So if it's empty, sorry, I guess we should say, would be if it's not empty. If we got a user back, then and then I'm going to move the insert inside of an else condition. We'll have to test this out and see if it works properly. So if our query returns something, it means this user is already in the database. Show an error message. If we get nothing back, it's a new user, so we can save them. I'm not certain if this check will give us the result we need, so we'll have to experiment a little bit. So I'll create a new user. It should allow me to save this account. Then I'll try to duplicate it. If I have a unique email, I forgot my bind param statement here. I put a parameter in my query, but I never filled that parameter. So I'll just copy my username bind param from down below. Okay, that's no good because it said my username already exists. It doesn't. Let's see what's in my table. Okay, so with the new user, it saves, I think. But now I'm going to try abc.com again. So if I resubmit the same user, now it says the user exists. And if I check my table, it has not inserted a duplicate. Okay, so I think our logic is sound now. So before we insert, run a query, do we already have a record with this username? If our query finds something, we've already got this person, so we don't want to insert them. If our query finds nothing, it's a new user, so we can go ahead and insert. Now you could also set up a unique index in the database. That would mean MySQL would throw an error, but probably better that we actually check it ourselves than just generate an error. So now when I'm done, I'm going to add my redirect. We'll take the user off to the login page. In terms of building the login page, well, we've got the page itself, but we need to build the form to validate it. So our login page, we don't really need to do anything with. We'll just use the form that I put on D2L, but we need to build this page now. So the page that's going to check when somebody enters the username and password, it's going to validate that credential against the database. So we want to go ahead and build this page next. We'll make validate.php. You'll need to make a new file with that name. And this is going to be largely a hidden page. It's going to check the user. If they're a valid user, we'll take them to the artist list. If not, we want to send them back to the login page with some kind of error message. So I've put some, but not all of the code you need for this in lesson 6. And it's probably in a hidden item. That seems to be how I'm rolling today. Yes, of course it is. Okay. If you refresh your lesson 6 folder, there's a document here that says lesson 6 in class notes. Please open that document up. So here's the file. We kind of did a similar exercise a few weeks ago. So this file has most but not all of the code we need in validate.php. It is out of sequence. And the different colors represent obviously the different sections of the code. So I want you to rearrange the code into the correct order. And then we can copy and paste it into that validate.php file I just asked you to build. I have to step outside for a minute. I'll be right back while you do that. If you think you're done, you can compare to the person next to you, see if you've got the same order or a different order. So which color should go first in this file? What'd you have first? Okay, the light green. Okay, so we'll grab the post variables. Okay, what would you do next? Which color? Okay, we'll connect to the database. Yep. What would come after the connection? Yep, the blue, the SQL command would have to go next. And after the blue, gray, so that's in the right spot. Which color would be next? Okay, we'll move the fetch command after our execute. So that's most of the code. Everything on here except for one line is stuff we've already seen before. What's the one thing we haven't used before? So PHP nicely gave us a function that will hash the password in the login and check it compared to the hashed value in the table. So let's copy all of this code. Go ahead and copy it. And inside of our new validate page, let's paste it into the body. You do need to put your database credentials back in. So this is most of the code we need on our validate page. We're going to take the username and password. We're going to bind the username parameter. We fetch the user, and then we'll call password verify. So we don't actually check the username and password at the same time here. We just are first checking whether the username exists. And if we find the username, we then will call password verify to hash the password they entered and check it against the password in the database. If we don't find the username, we'll do something else. So in this else, we need the rest of the code. So I want to just talk for a minute about what should happen if the user has put in a valid username and password. I think, now somebody said earlier, once they log in, we should take them to the artist list. That's kind of our main page. I think, Stella, you suggested that earlier. Was Jillian, you suggested that? Okay. I knew it was from this side of this part of the room. But let's think about this for a minute. So when this page loads, we now need to know whether or not the user is logged in, because we're still going to show the data from the artist table, but whether or not we show these links depends on whether our user is anonymous or whether they've registered and logged in. So it's going to look something like this. Here's our workflow. I want to go to the artist list page. So we're going to need to check, is the user authenticated, yes or no? Something important has to happen when the user logs in. So on our validate page, once we know, if we know the user's not valid, we're going to tell them, hey, invalid login. But we're going to have to do one important intermediate step when we get a correct username and password. And there will be definitely a question in the midterm quiz about this. On our validate page, in this section, before we take them off to another page, we're going to have to store their identity. Why would we have to do this? Why can't we just say, oh, the username and password are good, show them the next page that they've asked for? Why would we have to store their identity before we take them off to the next page? Julian? Exactly. Why would a browser forget they're logged in? If you did this in, say, a desktop application in Java or C#, you wouldn't need to, right? You could just store their identity and you can move around that application and everything's fine. Okay, so a new page loads, so any variables get lost. Kyle? Right, okay. Here's the term, you guys have described it perfectly, but there's actually an important term for this that you need to know. HTTP is a stateless protocol. What that means is in each request, any variables or values from a previous request are gone, they're destroyed. So it's like you said, if you hit refresh in the browser, whatever was there previously is gone. So on this page, when we check the database, we know who the user is. The problem is, as soon as we leave and go to another page, we no longer know who they are. So we don't know what to show them. So once they log in, we want to store their user ID, and we have a couple of options for storing their user ID. I'm going to recommend we use the session object. What would our other option be? Where else could we store the user identity besides a session? I think you said it. Did you say it? Nope. So how could we've got a couple of ways of getting around this stateless problem. Sessions are one. Cookies would be the other. So we could use either one. Some sites use both for authentication and storing user identity. Let's open up this file for a second. What's the difference? What's a session? What's a cookie? Why might we use one? And why might we use one or the other or both? Right. So what else can you do with cookies as a user? If you don't want a cookie on your machine, you can turn them off. What else can you do? What about sessions? If we store the user identity in a session, can users do anything with those sessions? How long does a session last and how long does a cookie last? Anybody have any idea? On most sites, if you log into them, most servers have a default session timeout. If you log into a site, typically how long could you leave that window inactive without making any new requests before you got automatically logged out? Yeah, 20 minutes is usually the default on most servers. Typically 20-minute default. What about cookie expiry? You kind of hinted at that, Adam. So it's specified by the developer. So when you write a cookie, you set a time to live. And typically, many cookies are set for 365 days. Or until they're deleted. So when you see websites, actually here, let's go to one. Let's go here. Some websites use both. Actually, I think Facebook's gotten rid of it. Many sites will have a checkbox that says, keep me logged in. So what do you suppose the keep me logged in does? Does it use a session or a cookie? It's using a cookie. How do you know when you have that keep me logged in and you come back and you're automatically signed in, even if you've shut your computer off for a week? How do you know it's a cookie? Right. So which is more secure, sessions or cookies? Sessions are absolutely more secure because they're shorter in duration, they expire if the user is not actively making new requests, and they don't survive the browser being closed. So if you have any applications that you use every day that you don't log into regularly, you will have a cookie on your machine for each one of those. It's a terrible idea from a security perspective to stay logged in. Same on your banking where it says, you know, do you want to remember my bank card number every time? Well, it's writing your bank card number. It's probably encrypting it, but it's in a cookie. So if someone gets your machine, well, they're already halfway into your account, right? You're only providing two pieces of information, the card. So if you store it in a cookie, somebody doesn't need to find that information. So cookies are more convenient for users. But less secure. So in general, we're better off using sessions for this reason, because the user can't delete, block them. They're not long lasting. So we're going to want to use a session to store our login. There's one big warning with sessions. I've learned this the hard way. Actually, I'll see if it's a really old site. It might even still be up. We can override the default session timeouts. And this is a great way to make your users really angry. I'll show you an example if the site is still online and I can get into it. I think so. It's old. It's probably 10 years old. It's still in use, though. So we built this site a long time ago. And you'll notice this little counter in the header. We had to add this after users started yelling at us. Just pick something. If you ever have to build a form that's really long, that's going to take a user a long time to fill out, you have to extend the session timeout. We learned this the hard way. We built this form and we didn't realize just how long it would take, and it's in also English and French. They have to put all the content in both languages. They have to put in all these numbers and then all of the financial information. So people were loading this form, filling it out. They would be working in here for like 3 hours to create a project, and then they'd click save at the bottom, and their session would time out and they would get taken back to the login screen. And we would have lost because it's stateless. There's no way to go back and get everything that was in there. So what we had to do here was several things. We said, do you want us to extend the session timeout? And they said no, but what we want you to do instead is put a save button in every single section so we can continually save as we go. And we also want a warning. So this opens at 19 minutes, it opens a little JavaScript alert and it says, you have 1 minute left to make a new request. But if you stay on this form, you're going to get logged out. So click save to save your work. So we didn't know, we built the form, we didn't know how long somebody would spend until people started telling us, I'm spending all day on this and then I'm getting kicked out and have to re-enter all my data. So this is something to be aware of. And other users will stay, I want to log in at the start of the day. I'm going to use this through the day, but occasionally I'm going to step away from the application. I don't want to be logged out. So extend the session timeout from 20 minutes. Leave me logged in for 2 hours or leave me logged in for 4 hours. It's not as secure, but we can override it if that's what users ask us to do. So this is something to be aware of. Okay, it's 10:02. You know what? We will take a quick break here. When we come back, I'm going to step out and get a coffee. We're going to figure out what are the missing lines of code here that we need that are going to allow us to store that user identity in the session object and then take them off to the list page once we do that. Okay, so we will come back at around 10 o'clock and do that.